This is the Promising Practices for Health Equity podcast, brought to you by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, a national leadership program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Hello and welcome to Promising Practices for Health Equity, the podcast created by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, affectionately known as IRL. I'm Krystal Lee, and today my co-host is the inimitable Mandy LaBreche. Hey, Mandy.
Hey, Krystal.
In previous episodes, we have heard from some of the original program leadership, and today we are thrilled to have current members of the leadership team with us today. We have IRL co-directors, Dr. Zinzi Bailey and Cody Cotton, as well as senior advisor and former co-director, Dr. Toben Nelson. Welcome, y'all, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Hey, friends. As you know, we like to start our meetings with a check-in question, and this podcast is certainly no exception to that. So our check-in question for today is, what is one thing that makes you feel hopeful these days? And I can start. I think what's making me hopeful these days is our younger generation, the youths, as I like to say. I feel like they seem to me like the most inclusive generation. They're more naturally able to embrace differences, and I feel like they have a lot of empathy and a sense of curiosity for the world around them. I think things that are happening that are good and bad, I feel like I see them better able to maybe lift up the good stuff and fight the bad stuff. And I always think back to what a former IRL teammate and friend, Haley Curitan, hey Haley, shared with me in the early days of IRL. And she would talk about how curiosity helps to develop and nurture empathy. And I think that's a lot of what I see in our younger generations and kind of the young adult population. I will toss it to Krystal.
Thanks, Mandy. The thing that's making me hopeful today is still like individual acts of kindness. So when I see people helping people, when I see folks taking intentional steps towards cultivating community and just, caring for each other, even in, the unprecedented times that we're experiencing. I personally would like to experience some precedented times, but until we can manage that, I am taking hope. I'm feeling hopeful about individuals caring for each other. And I will toss it to Cody Cotton.
Appreciate that, Krystal. I said I was going to change my answer, but I think I'm going to stick with the basics, the origins, kind of leaning more towards what Mandy said, the youth. There's so much hope in the youth. Definitely if you have an environment where we can teach them how to do better, as well as help them learn from our mistakes that we've made. So definitely lean on the youth. They give us a lot of hope for today. All right, throwing to you, Toben.
Yeah, thanks. I like those answers a lot, but I'm going to go in a different direction. I feel like what is making me hopeful is that people are pissed, that people are really angry and not okay with how things are going, and they want to see something different. And there's a standard, I think, that people are setting for themselves and for their communities and for their broader affiliations nationally. And that I think anger is okay, and it helps keep us accountable and helps keep us on track. And I always come back to the definition of public health is the constant redefinition of what is unacceptable. And there's a lot that we address that's unacceptable, completely unacceptable. And I take hope and some amount of pride too in working with people who are constantly trying to be better. So that's a weird way of saying that's what gives me hope. Zinzi.
Well, that's a hard act to follow, but I think I'm going to steal from all of you, being the last person. I think that's my privilege to steal from you all, in that this weekend I was at a protest, which is a peaceful way of exercising my rights in this democracy, supposedly, right? So being able to be in that space there were lots of young people, young kids who were seeing what democracy in action meant, being able to articulate where we currently stand, and being able to say, hey, I don't really agree with what's going on at the base level. I don't have to get involved in all the key components, but I don't like the way my friends are being treated, and being able to be there, be inclusive. And within that space, I had some of my faith restored in human beings, because even in the face of opposition and disagreement, everyone was in such a positive space. And disagreements just like rolled off of us and we were just together, right? So being in that intergenerational space and exercising rights, I find that hopeful.
Thanks, y'all, for checking in. I always appreciate hearing from other folks what's making them hopeful, because it kind of helps me to feel, oh yeah, maybe I missed that, or give me something to feel positively about in times when I don't feel so positive. So thank you so much for sharing that. How about we just jump right into the conversation? Zinzi and Toben, you've been with the program for almost as long as Mandy, who is a day one person. Tell us what you remember about the original vision for IRL at the time of development, and then what were your motivations and hopes for the program?
I mean, I think early days when I started as a senior advisor for the program and really came in with the research team, I really got the impression that folks were really thoughtful about trying to put this all together, and also recognizing that there was a seat of the pants element to it. I think the thing that a lot of folks talked about in early days was building the plane while we're trying to fly it, which I don't necessarily love that metaphor, but I understand what it means, at least in the IRL context. And then I think the nice thing about RWJ is that they're really willing to let people roll with it. There's not a lot of barriers or specific ways that they want things to happen. They really trusted us as a team to learn as we were going and make adjustments as we were going. And when I came in as director, I did not have an intention of really trying to make big changes, but we were getting a lot of feedback and there was the demand for it, and it was coming really from the fellows. And I think the best thing that we could do, the best thing we ever have done, is listen carefully to what they're saying and try and make adjustments. I don't think we succeeded in every case, but I do think we tried to be responsive. And I hope, and I think we've gotten some feedback anyway, that some of the changes we made help improve the program. So I take some satisfaction in that. And I think we've also built in some structures so we can open up the channels to better respond, better listen, better give fellows opportunities to share their thoughts with us. And taking that criticism, taking that and being accountable to them, I think has been a good thing for the program.
And I joined not too far after Toben. I remember we joined the research team in particular, and I think we were both kind of figuring out, what is this program? We got some initial information, but there's a lot of okay, so what do we do? And I remember that initially we were tasked to build out more of the elements of the research team interactions. And I think for a lot of us, we were still trying to figure out what is the direction that we want to be in. And so I think we spent a good amount of time just taking that in. And I think what was very clear was this desire for amplifying and enhancing community engaged research, having these relationships that were being built, but there being a tension with how we defined research rigor, especially in traditional disciplines, right? And as we have received them, right? So I think part of our challenge with the research team and then beyond is balancing what that means, right? What it means to be community engaged, community driven, and producing research that's worth doing. And that doesn't have to be at odds, right? And it doesn't mean that it's a clinical trial. So I think that has been a lot of IRL navigating what are the things that matter? What are the things that are going to have impact on community in a lasting way? And how do we navigate that through data and research? So I think as we've gone along, there's been a lot of pivots in terms of what we talk about. And I think we would, I think it was purposefully vague what research rigor was and what community was. And I think as we've gone along, I think we've meandered into more solid conceptualizations of what those things are.
Z, so you've been involved in IRL for a while now. I think maybe around year two is when you joined. So you're a year two person. And now that you've been serving as co-director, can you tell us a little bit about how you've seen the program evolve over your time on IRL, and how and why have program priorities shifted over the last 10 years or maybe 8 years for you?
I think there are a number of things that have changed throughout the program. I think number one, I think we became a lot more intentional around what community meant, right? I think there were, as Toben said, we were building the plane as we were flying it, which I feel very uncomfortable doing that, but that's the life that we live, right? But I think people had an intuition. Okay, there's something about community that's important, right? So how do we define that? Initial ideas of how to create these teams, be more intentional about how communities are included. I know in some of the initial passes changing some of the questions that we had interviewing potential fellows or potential teams, just being more probing around connections to communities and how were teams going to be held accountable to their communities moving forward. And I think that was a very important shift. It wasn't just about like, okay, what is the research project that you're going to be able to create, but how are you going to make the work that you're going to do, how are you going to be accountable to the communities that you're a part of? As it's moved on, I think we've been more intentional about like, what does a community partner get out of this program? What do community partners need? Which has been a kind of evolving story. Again, we haven't gotten it completely right, but we are, if not anything else, responsive to feedback and what people need. I think as we've gotten further, yes, there are very specific things that communities or community partners might need, but what are the key differences between a community and research partner, right? There are some elements that are structural that we can start getting at in terms of exercise of power and money and all of those key components, and being able to navigate those and maybe create ways of dispersing funds that are more aware and considering of those connections. And we developed a group, the CAB, so that kind of help advise us in terms of directions and provide ideas and new directions, lead certain things that we see as like assets for community partners, right? So we've figured out different ways to further define this community component. I think we have further to go. If we had another 10 years, we would go even further. But I think we've learned so much, right? I think there was an initial idea around this like community organizing thing being a thing and important. I think we didn't formalize exactly what we expected or hoped different teams to take away from some of the skill sets or case studies or people that they were interacting with, but they were able to connect with this idea of base building and there being power in people and being able to connect in that way. And I think as we've gone on, we've really delved a little bit more into restorative justice, because while we talk about all these things about community and like the definitions and this work and the skill set, really we are all individuals, people trying to connect, caring about key things that, we're bringing our entire lives with us into an interaction and being able to connect with one another. And sometimes that goes well, sometimes not so well, but all of this is built on relationships, right? So we've invested more in what community means for our IRL community. So that means getting to know one another, not just our work, but what draws us to this work, what connects us to want to do similar work, and how we can work together moving forward. So we've invested more in that. I think those are some of the very key investments that we've made in this program, pivots and changes.
Such a comprehensive overview of the last 8 years, Zinzi. Thank you. Thank you so much for highlighting that. There's so many things that you've mentioned. You talked about having to make pivots. We're talking about this concept of building the plane as it flies, which is like number one, fascinating, but also terrifying to me personally. And I can see how, it becomes necessary as a result of that way of doing the way of doing things, that it becomes necessary to pivot and change and listen and do all of these things that I'm hearing you all talk about. One of the things that you identified was the development of the CAB as a way to kind of elevate and try to serve the community and the community partners that are a part of IRL in a way that was not necessarily conceptualized at the beginning of the program. So I want to invite Cody to tell us a little bit about the CAB. Cody, you started as a member of the CAB, and now you serve as co-director of the IRL program with Zinzi. So tell us about that experience. Tell us about the work that you did with the CAB, how it's evolved over time, and just how you have experienced that.
Yes, appreciate it. Zinzi, you did an amazing job. I wish I could just cut up and clip most of the things you said when talking about it. But the CAB, the Community Action Advisory Board, where do I start? One, I'm just grateful for the rest of our CAB members who've done an unbelievable job since the incubation of it. But our main goal was to advise leadership on possibly more ways to center community, think about community, not just community as a whole, but the community partners. Then it started to expand a little bit more to being able to be involved more during some of our in-person meetings, to being able to get engaged with the fellows, to possibly teaching workshops, to leading more in the restorative way. Zinzi hit on it before. What does it mean to be restorative? And what did it look like to bring this into IRL setting? It looked like being more than just restorative, sitting down in a circle, listening to what people have to say, but truly understanding who we are. And who we are isn't just our names, but our values and our principles that we choose to bring to the space together and how we choose to see each other. So there's been so many different aspects of not just how the CAB got involved, but eventually how we continue to evolve as a program to ask the important questions like not just what does it mean to be in community or what does research mean, but how are we modeling ourselves as leaders? How are we putting being a leader in the forefront of what we do? So much has been gained in the last few years, especially the last 10 years, but I would like to say it's been a beautiful progress since we've been able to add value and support, not only just as the CAB, but been grateful to be in the role as co-director as well.
And I would be remiss to not call out that this CAB actually evolved out of the EDI task force. So it was a group of people. It was supposed to be a short-term, collection of folks trying to kind of change some of the structures of IRL to reflect the diverse groups of people that were a part of it. And making sure that we weren't just going with the contractor that did the thing that we said that we wanted to have, but that it was really embedded in who was part of the program and what we wanted to bring out in those people. And knowing that, some folks have had deep experience with, for example, diversity, equity, and inclusion training or things like that, maybe could have even led things themselves, and being able to show that people are in different places and being able to speak to that. So out of that initial group of IRL fellows and then alum, came this idea that actually, yes, there's the EDI task force, but there is an overall need for spelling out more of what community partners needed. And that is kind of the genesis of the CAB. So from the fellows, in a more directed feedback way through the EDI task force, came this CAB.
I love that, Z. I think it even hits on the point of just saying how we evolved. It wasn't just by being in meetings thinking that we have all the answers. It was the ability to take advice, listen to
Yep.
fellow, figure out how we could get engaged. I even think about the community corner, the way
Yes.
we've been able to give space to community partners just to talk amongst themselves, to talk about the wins, to talk about what's working out for them, to talk about ways things to get better, not just within their own community, but even within their project. So a lot of improvement. I feel like the IRL journey, if you could explain it in one word, in my opinion, I would just say growth. And then two, I'll say intentional growth.
Yeah, I want to speak to that a little bit. I think the initial idea of IRL was a good one. I think there was a recognition that community members can bring a lot more to the table and enhance doing research. But I think it was not until we got into it and some of the tensions that exist in doing this kind of work, especially community engaged research, really started to come up. And it's not just that we were doing it, but we also had to go back and repair or really reorient the whole way of doing work with community partners in community than I think maybe was initially conceptualized. And that push really came from the community partners in early cohorts. So the feedback we got, and we heard this a lot in early meetings, like they're tired of being exploited. They're tired of this sort of colonial parachute in, take data, and go out without really engaging with the community, without really listening to the kinds of questions that they wanted answered. What kinds, and what do you do with the research findings when you generate them anyway? So I think that really was a reorienting, and I would say we're partway through that reorienting. I don't think we've necessarily nailed it at this point, but the process of doing all this and the process of taking the feedback and hearing some of the anger from folks has prompted us, I think, to try and reorient a little bit to a different way of doing work. And I think the value of engagement with community really does shine through in including or having research that is led by members of the community, having members of the community ask questions that they need answers to. And then what follows is a different kind of structure for doing research. And it also follows that there's a shift in power and control of money. And I think a lot of what I've learned is when I came up, oh, you got to go study hard and get your PhD and come in and you'll be celebrated as this great mind, this great scholar. And the reality is, unless you actually produce something, no one cares about that. And the process of that doesn't select for humility. And I think humility is a big lesson, especially for researchers in this process. And I think we're trying to craft a new way of doing research that is, we still think is more valuable than the old ways, the traditional ways of doing research. I think we're on our way, and I look forward to more progress in that space.
Wow, y'all have said a lot about like changes and shifts to how things have happened over the last 9 years. Even in the past 5 years, like we've been through a global pandemic, we've been through lockdowns, and not to mention like all the current changes in the public health, DEI, EDI landscape. And you've talked about some of the shifts that you've made in response to these changes. And I wonder if there are lessons that you have taken away from the experience that you would be willing to share for folks who are engaged in work like this, or folks who are having to pivot in this time? What advice from this experience would you share with somebody who is having to deal with a lot of change right now?
I can start where I think you have to lean into your team and be able to connect with those who are around you, be open and curious about what others are experiencing, both on the team and, for us, it was what the fellows were experiencing. And I think especially during the pandemic, but I think also now, being willing to bypass what is planned and go off script to understand what the needs are and to be able to starting to address them. And I think one of the things that's necessary in order for that to happen is to have a little bit of humility in terms of like, oh, I know what to do or I don't know what to do. Being able to, because I think especially researchers, well, I'll speak for myself as a researcher, what I experience a lot is that we are brought up to get to a point where we say that we are an expert and that we know all the things and we have a plan, or we have this research that indicates X or Y, and we have a deep knowing of exactly what to do. And I think that's not necessarily that helpful, especially in times like these, where there's continuous pivots. There is no way to know exactly what to do, right? So I think that level of humility is necessary, and people are willing to share more of what they're going through and what they might actually need, as opposed to trying to be like, okay, yeah, I'm also a person who knows exactly what I'm doing and I have no problems, my team has no problems, and everything is fine. It allows, if you open up that environment so that people can share from where they don't know where to go, or there are missteps, or there are team tensions or conflicts, like, then I think we're better able to navigate the different pivots and be able to move forward in a way that works. So that's what I would offer.
Love that, Z. Just going to speak on it really quickly. I think I said a lot about this already, but I think one of my favorite parts when I think about IRL and the impact it's had on its fellows, often after we meet, we talk about what we've learned during the conference, but often people talk about how they had an opportunity to reset, to have a different narrative, a different perspective on just their lives. We do a great job on leadership, but we do an even better job. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to stand for something? What does it mean to just have faith, right? Just the small things. But I think when we look at the model of what IRL has represented, and definitely in the world we want to see, is to truly work on yourself. There's so much impact that could be done in the community. There's a lot of impact that could be done in the organization, but it truly starts with ourselves.
I'll just add, we were talking a little bit about the pandemic kind of happening right in the middle of IRL. And it's a really terrible experience. I certainly wish that had not happened. It really laid bare, I think, some of the tensions that we saw within the program, especially the kind of real stark differences between researchers and community members, where researchers were paused and they felt a little handcuffed and, oh, we can't do certain things. And on the community side, it was hair on fire, working around the clock. Just saw really remarkable efforts by folks in those community organizations, our community partners within IRL, how much they were dedicated, how much they cared about community, and how hard they were willing and able to work to meet the needs of their communities. And I think that experience was humbling from the perspective of researchers. And a lot of folks shared that, like just watching their community partner go through what they were going through and feeling a little bit helpless. Oh, we can't do our focus groups. because people are trying to survive and they're trying to get their needs met in a whole variety of different ways. And it just really, for me, emphasized those really different perspectives that researchers and community members are bringing to the table when they work on research projects together. And I think we're really trying to strive to a reciprocity of understanding for doing community engaged work. So really having that ability to see what someone else is going through, understand what their needs are, understand what their self-interests are, and then still be able to work with each other. And I think those are really different for researchers and for community members. And it's still important for us to be working together on some of these projects and bringing those different perspectives. But foundationally, it is going to require a large dose of humility. It's going to require a lot of work on relationship. And we've certainly seen great relationships. We've seen a lot of very tense relationships across teams. And, and just being able to strive for that reciprocity of understanding for everybody, I think that is an important key for successful work in this space.
Oh my goodness, you all have shared so much, and I'm not going to try to to summarize it, but it's bringing me back to it's a book called Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown, and there's so much in the book, and I highly recommend it to others. But what I'm hearing from you as the program navigated the necessary shifts brings me back to something that she said, that Adrienne Marie Brown says in her book, where the quote is, "We are realizing that we must become the systems we need. No government, political party, or corporation is going to care for us. So we have to remember how to care for each other." And another thing she says in the book, and this brings me to my next question for y'all, which is another thing she says in the book is that we must aim to be an organizational model for the change we call for in the world, for the change that we are calling for in the world. Can you tell us about, from your experiences and these lessons that you've learned and you've shared with us, how have you seen IRL be and become a model for the world that we want to see?
I think that's a big question, right? So I feel like we have put forth a different way of thinking about leadership, where I think a lot of times when we talk about, who are the greatest leaders in our history, we think of these like singular figures who are charismatic leaders, who are great orators and decision makers, and there's specific biographies of them. And I think what we're proposing through this program and through how we try to pivot and change is an idea of shared leadership where, yes, there may be a leader, a couple leaders, or we are going to share some of those leadership responsibilities, but being able to call on one another where it does not become a cult of ego or a cult of personality. It becomes about the mission that we have at hand, about the people who we have who are at the center of what we do. We are talking about interdisciplinary leaders, right? And how we lead together. And I think as we move forward, I hope that maybe the business school model may not be the sole way of moving forward. And it's not just a team leadership model. It's that we are in deep relationship with one another and we are sharing power for a joint future. So I think in that, that joint future is what is holding us together. That is having us take on different roles and not necessarily needing just one person at the top, the PI or that sort of thing, the hero. We're not going for a hero model of leadership.
The sort of the flip side of humility, and I think the enemy of good leadership is hubris. And I think recognizing that, no one person knows it all. No one person has the right way. This hero model of leadership, it's fun to write and read about those kinds of leadership models. I don't think it reflects reality, especially in our communities. And embracing a diversity of perspectives, embracing a diversity of ideas and ways forward, and putting things into the marketplace of ideas and that broader set of things and seeking those out really enriches the experience. If you've got a leader who's more autocratic, more susceptible to hubris, the strict father model of leadership, where everyone's looking to that one person for all the answers, I think that has some very severe limitations. And then if you're taking that model, you really have to enforce the credibility, the value of the strict father. And I'm saying father very specifically in this case. I think that's not a good long-term strategy. And I think innovation is best served by that diversity of perspectives and challenging oneself on various ideas and various decision points. At some point, you do have to make decisions, but I think we make better decisions with those broader perspectives.
This really resonates. Toben, thank you again for sharing. When we talk about the model for the world and what IRL has been, I just think from the simple example of literally the fellowship, what we're asking our fellows to do within leadership, we're not asking ourselves not to do. We do a lot of figuring out what can we do better, self-assessing, trying to become as self-aware as possible in the areas that we're looking to grow and ask our fellows to grow in. That's why we've done different storytelling training, restorative practice training. I mean, you all name it. You've been around longer than I have, but we've been very intentional with how we move forward, you know? So I just think, just briefly speaking, we've literally modeled what does it look like to be a leader and to show up in places and not know the right answer, knowing when to step up and when to step back. So that's been very important. And I love to say that IRL has exemplified that in so many different ways.
Yeah. I just want to add to that too. One of the concerns I had always had, and we certainly had gotten feedback on this point, was that it's IRL, it's a leadership program. The L is for leader. Where's the leadership training? And I've mostly felt like leadership training is worthless, at least the sort of the standard leadership training. Like, oh, you're going to come to a seminar or a workshop and we're going to teach you how to be a leader. I don't think that's how it works. And I think maybe, and I worried a little bit about not bringing content, but I didn't know what the content was. As I've gone along, and I think as we've added things like the restorative justice practice and paid more attention to community perspectives, really felt the leadership training here is more experiential. And it's part of the reason that a cohort model is valuable. So it's not that we're experts and coming in and saying, here's the way, here's the cookbook, you get this as a part of your registration for participating in this program. It really is that sort of emergent quality of we're learning as we go and as we're trying to be leaders in these spaces, and also getting that peer feedback as well. And everybody has to be they have to be true to themselves as a leader as well. Being able to navigate that, make mistakes, and we can develop a long list of mistakes that were made in this program. But coming through that, I'm hopeful that most folks got an experiential leadership experience and that they feel more prepared and able and know what thematically are some of the components of strong leadership. And then everybody can craft that to their own style and make it their own.
Wow, I'm loving all of this, and the time is flying by. So I'll bring us to our next question. It is Adrienne Marie Brown also says in her book, Emergent Strategy, that, and I quote, all that you touch, you change. and all that you change changes you. Can each of you tell us about the impact that IRL has had on you individually and personally? And how has your involvement with the program changed you?
Mandy, that's a massive question.
I'm gonna need one of those Barcelona couches to answer that question.
I feel like there's so much and that I'm not going to be able to articulate it all. So I'll just point to one very glaring element. I think that IRL has been my testing ground, and I don't know what the best word is, but like a playground of sorts, if I can make it a little bit more whimsical, in thinking about my leadership on a whole. Thinking about transitioning and thinking about those leaders that I saw as, oh, they published a lot, or they led all these people and they were able to have these speeches, or they were able to do these things, and seeing these like very charismatic personalities and thinking about them being people, right? And having faults and having biases and interacting with other groups of people and being influenced by other folks and having changes that they made along their journeys. And so I think from that standpoint, entering into the space more tentatively, there was that initial, okay, I can take the lead on something, but then being able to move on to essentially be like, okay, can have more decision making, but then have this shared idea of leadership, sharing power, not being the final decision maker on some things, trusting others, and being able to be curious about directions. So I feel like I have definitely learned so much. And I can tell you, like, the people that I have met through this program have been the best people who will continue to be a part of my life moving forward. And being able to develop those relationships year after year, month after month, Zoom call after Zoom call, I think has been essential to the last almost decade of my life.
I can reflect on that a bit. I think IRL is awesome and really difficult all at the same time. I think there were a lot of places where just exceptionally challenging for me personally. The thing that I'm most pleased about, I guess, was when those challenging times, when you're facing those challenging times, and I think I learned this from IRL, through IRL, leaning hard into your values and staying focused on the mission of what you're trying to do provides a really clear guidance. So when things seem challenging, when there's hopelessness is creeping in, those values, and I think that for me, they existed prior to being involved in IRL, but I really firmly believe that we're strengthened through being involved in IRL. Leading into those has been enormously helpful for me personally. And I hope I have been able to uphold those values, exemplify those values, obviously not always, but as best I can. So that I feel good about.
There's a lot that can be said on this question. As he told me, you all did an amazing job answer it, but I'm gonna answer it a little different from my perspective. I'm 30 years old, and I've been blessed to be around some amazing leadership. A lot of PhDs, a lot of people who've had 20 to 30, even 40 to 50 years in the community doing this work.
Settle down with that.
Yeah, I think about the speakers we brought in, like people who were really just really profound in their craft. And being able to be around this, I think my number one goal is always seeing what way I could bring this back to my community, what ways I could help other small business or community-based organizations to be able to have this advantage. Again, some people never even knew about a fellowship my age, let alone had the opportunity to be a co-director of one. So this impact it's had on me, it allows me to show up more. not just show up more as a leader, but a leader of leaders. So I'm really thankful for this impact IRL has had on me.
Thank you all. I'm so grateful for the time that we spend together. We usually do a checkout question as we wrap up. So we check in with each other and then we check out. So as you all know, and we've talked about over time, this work, the work towards health equity, the work against systems of oppression, it takes its toll, right? And Sean Ginwright, in his book, The Four Pivots, says that changing things that are broken in our society requires us to heal both individually and collectively. And so as a final thought, I want to invite you all to share with our listeners, how do you engage in self-care as you engage in this work?
First, I just try to listen to my body and listen to my heart. We're in, it's 4 seasons for a reason. Depending on the season we're in, we may feel different, we may move different, we may receive things differently. So depending on the season I'm in, I'm trying to listen to my body. Sometimes I may need to lay in bed stretched out, playing chess on my phone. But more times than not, I need to do something about it, get active and find out. Maybe it's rest being in the community. And sometimes it's just rest being with family. So more than anything, just try to listen to my body and find out what ways I could reset so I could keep this work going.
And I think I make sure that I have a lot of downtime. I try to rest, but oftentimes for me, that means going somewhere else where I'm out of cell signal or Wi-Fi signal, being able to reflect and take time and actually being out. Yeah, Krystal, being out. So I think that is helpful to reflect and actually know where I stand and how to come back refreshed and be able to tap in and tap out. And I think that's going to be essential for sustainability. So that's kind of what I do. And I spend a lot of time with my family, being near or in water as much as possible. So
For me, I'm not so sure I'm all that great at taking care of myself. I think a lot of folks may also feel similarly. I certainly can do better. I do appreciate the priority and the premium that we as a collective have placed on self-care in trying to do this work. I talk to my students about doing policy work in public health is a lot like banging your head against the wall. And you do need some rest and perspective and the ability to persist in doing that. And I think some self-care is crucial to that. For me, during IRL, I took a lot of walks in the woods with my dog. And I think some of that can bring some moments of peace and clarity, which are elusive sometimes. But the other thing I'll say about this leadership team and also fellows in the program really value the mutual support that folks bring. I don't feel like I would have made it through this, and I don't think I would be here today without that. It's enormously valuable to me. And when I reflect on my IRL experience, I think that mutual support has been absolutely critical. And I think that's a theme for doing this work more broadly as well. I think that the extent to which we can continue to provide that for each other, treat each other as human beings with as much empathy as you can bring, I think those are recipes for success for all of us collectively.
Wow, that's so good. I think we're at a wrap here. So I just wanted to say thank you to you three, Cody, Toben, Zinzi, for joining and talking to us today. We're so grateful for hearing all your stories and experiences and perspectives with the IRL program over the last several years. And just a special thank you to each of you three. I think individually and collectively, you three have poured so much just care and intentionality and love into the program. And, that's why we're here today. So thank you for joining us. And yeah, can't wait for the what's to come next.
I echo what Mandy said. Thank you all so much for being with us, for sharing your experiences with shepherding the IRL program, through the last several years. So thank you for being with us, and thank you to our listeners for being with us throughout this episode. We want this to be a two-way conversation, and so we would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts with us via our LinkedIn page, where we'll post our show notes and any resources that we mentioned in this episode. And don't forget to subscribe to Promising Practices for Health Equity so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us today. And remember, we're all on this journey together. And every step we take together brings us closer to a healthier, more just world. Until next time.
Promising Practices for Health Equity is produced by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, a national leadership program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. A special thanks to our guests, our production team at Studio Americana, and to you, our listeners, for being a part of this important conversation.